it makes total sense. But before we had kids, I would wake up like cursing. But now, it's funny because with the pandemic, there's no traffic. So I'm getting like 20 more minutes of sleep every morning. So I think this morning I was up at 4 and I was in the car. Yeah, that's sleeping in.
Oh.
And I was in the car at 4:30 and I got in. No, that's not true. This morning I was in the car at 5 because I didn't get, yeah, I slept until 4:30. That's become, because I used to get up at 4 and now I'm getting up at 4:30. But it's funny because that ride in for me is about the most productive hour of the day. I can read, I get the emails done, and the ride back is probably the second most productive hour of the day. Because again, I can read, I can, return calls and stuff like that. I saw you drinking your water. I'll drink mine as well.
Well, don't worry. I've got some of that kind of water too.
Hey, what is that?
So that is Breckenridge bourbon, Breckenridge, Colorado. It's one of my personal favorites. I know you're a bourbon guy, so I thought I would drink one of your favorite drinks. You've never had it.
You know what? I don't know if I've had the Colorado bourbon.
Okay, well, I will buy you a bottle, and I will bring it over. We will share it in your backyard. How about that?
Yes, we will.
All right.
People have questions here. Am I supposed to be reading these?
No. I'm going to go ahead and ask you this. How would you describe the last couple of months in a word? I mean, for me, it's been difficult. I've been at home. You've been doing the Today Show in your family room. You've been on the front lines of the COVID crisis. You've been covering the racial unrest across the country, doing this all amidst the backdrop of a pandemic. How would you describe it?
Surreal, if we're just using one word. It's I said maybe about a month ago on TV, we basically for the last few months we've been lurching from one once in a generation lifetime story to the next, and we've been doing it like every 3 weeks. And I said yesterday during the 8:30 restart on the Today Show, we come back, we're in the studio, it's like, hey, it's July 1st 2020. It's in the prompter, and I looked up and I read it, and I said right out of it, I was like, oh, it's the first day of July. That means it's the second half of this god awful year, and it really has been. I mean, it has been. And here's the thing, it's only July. I mean, it's just. But I had this conversation on my cable show a couple of weeks ago with John Meacham, who I know you know. John, of course, noted author, presidential historian, blah, blah, blah. And I always look to Mr. Meacham to provide comfort in solid times like these. And he pointed out a while back, sort of at the beginning of this, before the George Floyd death and the social unrest that followed. He said, if you look at America's story closely, carefully, every time we've been through something like this, we've come out better. And now, granted, it takes a little while to get out of the muck and the mire, but when we do, we're a better country, we're a better society. And I believe that. I believe on the other side of this, we are in myriad ways going to be exponentially better.
Boy, I hope you are right. And I'll go ahead and plug his podcast, Hope Throughout History, that he's doing right now, is unbelievable in that regard, Craig. It takes us back to some of the darkest times following the Depression and the World Wars, and tells how we found hope and how we rebuilt. So Hope Throughout History, John Meacham, is unbelievable. I hope you are right. Sometimes it feels like it's not going to get better just because of the division in particular in this country, doesn't it?
Yeah, but you know what though? I just, and I occasionally get accused of being perhaps too optimistic and seeing things through these rose-colored lenses. But I do think there's a tendency for each generation in our country, especially, to think, oh my God, these are the worst of times. Oh, it's never been as bad as this. And we fail to forget that, oh, there was a civil war at one point. You know, oh, there was World War One. Oh, and then there was the second war to end all wars. And then there was, there was Jim Crow. And then there was, of course, this country's original sin of slavery. Like we've been through darker days in America than this pandemic. And I would contend that even this current fight for social justice that we're in, this moment that's turned into a movement, we've been through more than this. But ours is a system that can endure. I had a professor in college that pointed something out to me. It's always stayed with me. Not to get all whatever, but he said his contention was that America's greatest blessing can sometimes also be its greatest curse. And by that I mean, if you look at some of you look at some of the civilized societies right now, whether it's Germany or Canada or some of the Scandinavian countries that have become havens of happiness, they are by and large homogenous, whether it's racially, whether it's ethnically, or whether it's religion. Here we are in the United States of America, guys that look like you and guys that look like me, and we Muslims and Christians and Buddhists and Catholics, and we have all of these different kinds of people who've managed to peacefully coexist reasonably since 1776. And it's still very much an experiment, but by and large it's working. And there's no other country that's tried to do it, and no other country that's done it as well as or as long as we've done it.
But I've heard you talk on the Today Show about these moments we've been in before. And we can go back to Ferguson. We can go back to Breonna Taylor, which seemed like that. Ahmaud Arbery. So many, unfortunately, we could name them for the next 30 minutes, sadly. Why do you think this one will lead to change? And what does change look like?
So the first part of your question, why do I think this is different? Unfortunately, I've covered a lot of protests and demonstrations over the years, usually in the wake of someone who looks like me dying either in the hands of police custody or at the hands of someone else, in the case of Trayvon Martin especially. But in the past, especially, you look back to St. Louis and Ferguson, the protesters there, they look like me. I was in Washington, D.C., oh God, it feels like 3 months ago. I guess it was probably only 4 weeks ago, a few Sundays ago. And I lived in DC for a number of years, as you know. I met Lindsay there. And I'm there in Lafayette Square, right out, just a few hundred feet from the White House. And I'm looking around at these protesters who are screaming. Some screaming at police, others just screaming into the air. And they look like you. Like I said to Lindsay that night, I had never seen so many angry white people like chanting Black Lives Matter, no justice, no peace. Like it was just, and before that, I had seen the protests in Minneapolis and Seattle, and I chalked it up to demographics. Like if you've been to those cities, you know what the makeup of the city is. So you look at the protests, that makes sense. DC, no, like it was. And it was in that moment that I was like, oh, this is different. And I thought it was going to be something where the passion waned, and it didn't. And in fact, what happened is you had protesters who started to protest the way they were being treated as they protested. It was just so. I think what you've got now is you've got a demographic shift. But you also have, and this is, I think, something that perhaps has gotten lost in all of this. It's not just the fight for social justice. You've got 40 million Americans that are either unemployed or underemployed or furloughed. And oh, by the way, we are in the third or fourth month of this global pandemic. You have all of these things that are intersecting simultaneously that are giving life and breath to this movement. So that's one way I think it's different. The second part of your question is the $64,000 question. Like, what does change look like? I don't know the answer to that, and I think it's going to look, I think it's going to look different in different parts of the country. But I do think it's telling that right now you've got monuments and statues and memorials that are being torn down and renamed fairly quickly. You know, I grew up in South Carolina,
Right.
and I was in Charleston in the wake of that church shooting, and I was there on State House grounds when they brought the Confederate battle flag down, and I was moved on almost a guttural level, and then to see Mississippi, a state, as Dr. King said back in '68, a state, you know, sweltering with injustice, more so then than now. But to see Mississippi move as quickly as it did to bring down a state flag that had been, people forget that just a few years ago, the people of Mississippi voted to keep that flag up. I think that if you look back, not to get, again, what all, you know, when the Soviet Union fell the first time,
Yeah.
the statues of Stalin and Lenin, they came down. In 2003 in Iraq, the Saddam Hussein statue, we all remember that iconic image of that statue coming down. What we're seeing right now, the symbols, the statues, the monument coming down and being renamed like that, that's telling.
It is. I caution this. I spoke with a good friend of mine, one of our neighbors, who's a very well-respected author and filmmaker and professor. And I said, what has changed you? And he said, it needs to start with voting and with President Trump. And I said to him, now, let me just caution you there. We had a black president for 8 years. President Trump has been president since 2016. So A, if you think President Trump caused these problems, then I think you're ill-informed. And B, if you think a new president is going to solve this, I think you are deemed to fail. What do you make of that? That he felt like if we get Trump out of office, that's change.
I would say this.
Okay, got a little bit of a Wi-Fi issue. Looks like it is on Craig's end and not on mine. Okay,
There we go.
you're back now.
I'm back.
You were spinning for a minute, but go ahead, answer that.
I would say this. I tend to think that the same country that gave us, you know, Bill Clinton gave us George Bush. The same country that gave us George Bush gave us Barack Obama. The same country that gave us Barack Obama gave us, you know, Donald Trump. It's this idea, and I do tend to think sometimes that we overemphasize the office of the presidency.
Yeah.
I don't think that the presidency is necessarily who we are as a country. Like if you look at census data, the demographics of America are changing. That's undeniable. And Dave, I think, and again, you know, I don't have necessarily any data to support this, but I think that people who look back on this chapter in our democracy 20 or 30 years from now are going to scratch their heads. The same way that we look back on the 60s and we think, oh my God, how did the United States of America, how did we ever think that a black man and a white woman, or a white woman and a black man marrying, how did we ever think that was a problem? Loving v. Virginia. Or how did we think that poll tests ever made sense? Or how did we think that two men getting married or two women getting married, how did we ever think that was a problem? I think that our kids, not our grandkids, I think that our kids 20 years from now are going to read and watch some of the debates that we've had and they're going to be like, what the heck? What the heck were mom and dad fighting about? But it just, it just takes time. It just takes time.
These upcoming debates, our grandkids, our kids are going to say, why are we watching two late 70s? Well, we won't get into that. We won't get into what's going to be on the stage of the presidential debates. But bringing it back to Westport, how do you reconcile this moment we're in, living in a town where we are 1% Black? Is our diversity a problem, or is it just a reality? And we have a common friend who I was trying to urge to move to Westport. When she was moving, a Black friend, I said, you've got to move to my town. Craig lives there, I live there. And she says, I don't want my kid to be the only Black kid in the grade. And I said, but if everybody says that, how are we going to change our diversity? So how do you reconcile that moment living in Westport? And how do you talk to your kids differently because of the reality we live in, 1% Black in our town?
I don't talk to my kids yet about any of it because Lindsay and I have just decided that, and we made a conscious decision about a month ago that they're just too young to really grasp any of this. But to your first point, I would contend, and I'm glad you brought this up, I would contend that when the book is written about the death of democracy, hopefully a couple of generations from now, there will be a chapter devoted to self-segregation. And what's not talked about a lot in our country is what we have done, not legislatively, but what we have done individually. Lindsay and I, we lived in Washington, D.C. proper. I lived on U Street. She lived in DuPont. For folks who are familiar with the geography of Washington, you'd be hard to find a more diverse city in America, and certainly a more diverse 8-block radius than that area. You could walk, a block and you'd hear 4 languages. We love that. And then we moved here, and you know James Blake, a noted tennis player. I remember we were at James's place, and it was me and James and another Black guy, and it was either James or the other guy who looked around. They're like, this might be the largest gathering of Black men in Westport ever. And in that moment, I laughed. I was like, oh, you're right. And now that I've been here for a few years, I'm like, I think that actually probably was. There's a problem. But the problem isn't a Black-white problem, Dave, in Westport. The problem is green. You know what property taxes are in this town. I know what they are. And a lot of folks, most folks who look like me, can't afford to live here. So the issue of affordable housing is real, not just in Westport, but all over the United States of America. The problem is, and my mother and I have had this conversation, it's very difficult to discriminate against someone if you know someone like that. Like if I've got a friend who's Muslim, I probably don't hate Muslims. If I got a friend who's Black, I probably don't hate Blacks. If I got a friend who's gay, I probably don't hate gays. But what we've done in our country is we've and some of it's been conscious, some of it's been unconscious, but we've decided that we only want to live around people who are like us. And when you do that, when you surround yourself with like-minded people, you're not being challenged. You're not having your worldview expanded. All you're doing is creating an echo chamber, not just for your politics, but for everything. So we've got to ourselves with people who don't look like us, who don't think like us. Now, the great thing about journalism, as you know, is you can pose those questions. You don't have to answer them. So I would just pose the question. How do we do that?
Yeah, yeah. I think our town is making strides in affordable housing, something they've been trying to fix over recent years. The last year or two, they have made a lot of progress. I know Jim Marpy really wants to do something to change the lack of diversity in our town. It certainly is a problem. A lot of people have chimed in that they love you and, of course, your wife, Lindsay Zarniak. For those that don't know Lindsay, she is a sportscaster, national sportscaster, a social media star. Follow her, Lindsay Zarniak. And she had an interesting conversation, which was on Sirius Satellite today and on Instagram with your mom. So I'm really curious what it's like for you in Westport. I mean, have you ever experienced discrimination or racism?
You know what? I honestly have not. Not in town. It's not something that I have encountered. Now, I have certainly run into the what I call the eyebrow raise. Like, wait a minute, who's this guy? But I think that's a function of when you don't see people who don't look like you. When you see someone who doesn't look like you, you're like, oh, huh, that's interesting. And my family is also diverse. My wife is white, my kids are mixed. So, people see us coming to a restaurant or a store. It's like, oh, this is different. We don't get a lot of that here. But no explicit, overt racism that I'm acutely aware of.
I have always felt in my experiences that the higher the education level in a town, the less the likelihood of racism. I could be wrong. I could be really underestimating the problem, but I tend to see racism in towns that are less educated, and we live in a very highly educated, enlightened town. So I'm pleased to hear that. I'm very pleased to hear that. I know you've got some breaking news that you are hosting the fireworks 4th of July, May.
Is that breaking?
We're going to have those fireworks. You are going to, you're in charge of the broadcast, you and Dylan Dreyer. Tell me about that. And is the 4th of July one of your favorite holidays? How will that be given that everyone's at home and stuck inside? There will be a huge audience.
I gotta be honest with you. I didn't realize that until I was on a conference call earlier this week and someone pointed that out. I'm also fairly convinced that I was asked after probably a half dozen people have passed. So it's you're in the business, that more often than not, it's just kind of being around when everyone else says no. So no, it's an honor. It's the 44th annual. It's going to be different this year. They have been doing these spontaneous pop-up fireworks shows in New York City for the last 5 or 6 nights. They're doing one in each borough, and they're deliberately not announcing where it's going to happen until about 5 or 10 minutes before, because they don't want like a large crowd to gather. So we've taped those, and what we're going to do is take those 5-minute fireworks shows and edit those, and then we're going to tack on a live 10-minute finale with the Empire State Building as a backdrop. That's going to be, I think I'm probably actually violating some sort of laws here, but whatever. I mean, it's, whatever. Anyway, that's going to be the broadcast. And John Legend and the Black Eyed Peas and Tim McGraw and the Killers, and I'm leaving out 1 or 2 names, but they're going to provide some musical entertainment. But your point about it being the largest broadcast likely in the history of the fireworks show, yeah, you're right. And I didn't realize that until 3 days ago when it was brought up on a conference call. Most of the fireworks shows, as here in Westport, they've been canceled. So the 4th of July, a lot of folks are going to be at home tuning in to see us. And here's the other dirty little secret. Sometimes we pre-tape a lot of those shows. We're not pre-taping this. I mean, we're pre-taping parts of it, like the musical. Some of it will be pre-taped. But Dylan Dreyer and myself, we're going to be on the rooftop of a hotel. And in the words of Bill O'Reilly, we're doing it live. We're doing it live. Could be awesome. Could be awful.
Could be New Year's Eve, Don Lemon. You know, I mean, who knows? No, it won't go that direction. That's my guy Don, and he does it unlike anything Craig Melvin would ever do. All right, so the hardest hitting question we always ask everyone on these is, think about your day off in Westport, no work. What is your ideal day in Westport? What you're waking up? What are you going to do? How you finish it out? Give me your perfect Westport day.
If I don't have to go to work, I'm not setting the alarm.
No.
So I'm gonna wake up when my body clock goes off. I'm gonna go down to Coffee Ann. I'm gonna get me a sausage, egg, and cheese croissant, and then I'm going to probably sit and watch 15 minutes of news, and then turn it off because I'll feel guilty about not working if I watch more. Then after that, I'll have to work out because I'll feel guilty about the croissant. And then at that point, I will probably watch one of my Netflix shows that I'm binging at the time, because I'm assuming the kids aren't here.
Well, if that's your ideal day.
Assuming the kids aren't here. At that point, I'm going to probably drive over to Campo, maybe walk the beach, maybe just sit there, read 20 pages of whatever book I'm reading at the time. I'll make one phone call or two to a family member just to check in. This is nice. Now that I'm talking this out, I'm like, maybe I should call in sick tomorrow.
Dude, I'm liking this.
Then I'll come back to the house. At this point, it's probably 2:30 or 3. If it's 3, I'm not going to feel guilty about making that afternoon cocktail. Going out back.
Hold on, freeze. What's the cocktail?
It depends on the time of year. So if it's the summer, I'm going to have a whiskey sour probably. If it's the fall or winter, there you go. There you go. If it's the fall or winter, probably just a whiskey neat or maybe a rock or two. Or if Lindsay's joining me, maybe a vodka soda with a splash of grapefruit, which is her go-to. We'll do that. I'll light up a cigar, finish the cigar. At that point, the kids have probably stormed the Bastille. And I'll fire up the grill. I'll do some steaks. I'll do some corn. Do some potatoes. Everything I can put on the grill and clean up easily. And then that's it. I mean, my God, man, that's a great day.
That's a great day, my friend. Beauty and Coffee wants to know who Craig's talking to. Hi, I'm Dave Briggs, former CNN, former NBC Sports and Fox News anchor, and a good friend of Craig's. I probably should reintroduce all of us on the Westport Magazine page here. That is a great day. What shows you Netflix binging right now, though?
I'm going to have to wrap this up after this, by the way, because I'm going to have to go pick up my boys soon.
Okay.
So my guilty pleasure right now between us, it's not between us, obviously, if it's on Instagram. I'm really into Space Force. Have you watched any of this?
Which one? Space Force, Steve Carell.
Oh, yeah.
I have not.
And then, so I've gotten into that. And then today I watched like 10 minutes of this show called, I don't want to get the name wrong, but I think it's like Lava is the Floor is Lava. You got to check it out. But it's hosted by a buddy of mine named Rutledge Wood. You know Rutledge. You know Rut.
I know Rut very, very well.
And so he's got this show on Netflix. I kid you not, Briggs. I kid you not. This is not an exaggeration of the show. It's people climbing over furniture to avoid falling into like this vat of liquid. And that was my reaction. I was very skeptical. And then I'm watching the show and I'm like, oh my God, I can't turn away. It is. Wow. Oh yeah. And like Rut is great. Like he's perfect for this show. But it's like kids climbing across furniture, trying not to like touch the floor.
Yeah, Rut and I had a very engaged conversation about Bubba Wallace in the wake of all of that. And I know you got to wrap this up. Schitt's Creek is what I would recommend to anyone who's home during COVID. Schitt's Creek is the quintessential COVID watching.
But
have you seen it?
Well, I watched all, I think 6 or 7 seasons. Oh, I loved it.
Oh, so you've seen it.
But here's the thing about Schitt's Creek. You can't watch, and maybe it's changed, but the most recent season, you can't get on Netflix yet. You've got to actually download the Pop app.
That's correct.
So, but I mean, I love, like, we could play this all day, but like the Ozarks, I love the Ozarks. I try, like, some people watch TV to learn, like they watch, like, documentaries, and
Yeah.
I watch TV to get away from reality. Like, I just want to be dumb for an hour, 30 minutes. Like, just let me escape everything. So it's
I'll watch All American or one of those shows with my son on Netflix just to escape. And let's bring this full circle back to Westport if we can. Apologies to you folks that don't care about Westport, Connecticut. This is for Westport Magazine. What do you love about this town as we wrap this up? What do you love about where we live?
I'm from Columbia, South Carolina. And when I moved up to DC first, I was suspicious because in South Carolina, everyone's friendly. And I found in DC, pretty much everyone was friendly. When we moved to Connecticut, Lindsay and I were both skeptical about the friendliness of people. We're like, oh, these New Yorkers, they're all, everyone's in finance, everyone's about themselves. And we have found the opposite to be true. People in our little town, they're really kind, like it reminds me a lot of where I grew up. And the kids can play like in the streets and ride their bikes and on the call. And you don't have to worry about a lot of things that a lot of parents have to worry about. It's a blessing, but it can also be a curse. I think sometimes our little town can be perhaps a little too idyllic as well. But that's an Instagram Live for another day.
And we'll do that another day. I agree with you. It is the people that makes this town what it is. Craig, it's been a great pleasure. Let's cheers as we sign off. And next time, I'm going to bring you a bottle. I hear you can make a mean old fashioned. Is that true?
I don't want to confirm or deny, but
is that the one cocktail your specialty?
I do a pretty decent old fashioned. I do a pretty decent Manhattan as well.
Manhattan.
But I do both. Not to brag or boast, but yes. But it's more of a fall winter drink.
Yeah, I like it at all times, but you're right. It is better in the fall. Lindsay has it right with the vodka and the splash of grapefruit in the summer. But I'll bring this when it cools off, and we'll have some in the back patio. Great pleasure, my friend, as always. Craig Melvin, today's show. Check him out 11 a.m. hour on MSNBC as well. You are the man, my friend. Very enlightening conversation.
Safe drive back, by the way, from the Adirondacks. Safe drive.
Thanks, buddy. That's Craig Melvin, the terrific host of the Today Show. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Craig is also as you can see, a wonderful human being, husband to Lindsay and father to Dell and Sibby. And he's just an amazing person. So if you see him, just say hello. Don't get the selfie. I'm sure he gets enough of that. It's been a great pleasure talking with him about all the issues we are facing right now as a country and as a town in Westport, Connecticut. So thanks so much for being with us. Again, we urge you to send us a DM at Westport Magazine, people you'd like to see interviewed, or shoot me a note at Dave Briggs TV, DM, or in the comments section. I'll repost this interview on both. And let us know who you'd like to hear from. Next week, Bill Taibbi, the restaurateur and chef who's opened a new Mexican restaurant, Don Memo. It's going to switch from bourbon to tequila next weekend. We will have the Staples principal on as well, my friend Allison Camerata from CNN. We'd like to hear from you. Who do you want us to talk to? And we want your engagement on all of this. Thanks so much for joining us for Connecting Connecticut. Have a happy 4th of July, a wonderful weekend. Let's find some patriotism in what has been a very difficult couple of months.